So, welcome everyone who is joining us here for our Böll.Global. The Böll.Global is a format where we, as the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, offer current topics of international global scale for the public. And today's lunchtime, at least in Europe, it's lunchtime event is on Turkey after the arrest of Imamoglu, between authorization, protest, and international power. And I'm very happy that all of you join us. And I'm also happy that we have distinguished guests, which I might invite already to switch on their camera. Meltem Aslan, director at Hakikat Adalet Hafizia Merkezi, David Bartet, the director of the Istanbul office of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, Burak Çopur, political scientist and Turkey expert and a professor at the IU International University in Essen. And last but not least, Deborah Düring, member of the German parliament, just recently re-elected and foreign policy speaker of the Green Party group in the German Bundestag in the last term. Welcome to all of you. And none the least, I'm myself, I am one of the two co-presidents of the foundation on a global level based in Berlin. My name is Jan-Philipp Albrecht, and I will be your moderator today and dive into this very hot issue of this current situation. Together with the panelists, we want to discuss various questions burning to all of us, of course, at the moment. Why did the AKP government choose this moment to crack down on the opposition? Is this a crucial or critical juncture for democracy in Turkey? And what is the foreign policy context of the Erdogan government's action? Also, we'd like to shed some light on the question, how does domestic repression in Turkey affect its role in the changing European and transatlantic security architecture, which we just see, of course, happening? And which possibilities of influence remain for Germany and the European Union vis-à-vis Turkey and the Turkish government in such a situation? I'm very happy that so many people are with us here, and I don't want to spend too much time on the introduction anymore and go directly into understanding some of the key questions regarding this situation. And the first question goes to our office director in Istanbul, David Bartel. David, what's the general situation? I might start with how do the Heinrich-Böll Foundation and its partners judge what is happening so far in Turkey, especially after this arrest, which everybody noticed of Imamoglu?
Yeah, thank you, Jan-Philipp. Thank you for the invitation. Good to see you, Meltem, Burak, also Debbie Düring. I'm speaking of someone who is living in Turkey. I was there until a few days ago, and I have been twice to the Saraçhane, which is the Istanbul town hall. I have been to the protest there. So I will share some personal impressions and also, as Jan said, what our partners and analysts we work with see so far. But I hope that Meltem will correct all my flaws that I might be saying in the coming few minutes. I have 3 points, and the fourth one is only a teaser for Debbie. So I start right away. My first point would be they had it coming, but everybody was surprised. So Imamoglu definitely has been a rising star in Turkish politics. A few years ago, he was a quite unknown municipality politician, but in recent months and weeks, he has developed into the only politician to be a real threat to Erdogan, which is already a part of an answer to the question, why now? It's still, so he was growing a lot in visibility and sympathy. He has the nimbus of having beaten Erdogan 3 times, because he he won Istanbul in 3 elections, and winning Istanbul means also beating Erdogan. And he was about now to set off for a 4th time. And so this is already something that was very much seen in the public. He is the opposite of Erdogan in the sense that his political style is integrating rather than polarizing. He is a secularist politician from CHP party, but he is also a Muslim, so he also addresses and draws some sympathy from Muslim voters. So yes, he is a real threat. He has the potential to win. Why now still is a little bit of an enigma to most of the people, almost all the people I have heard so far, because he had already a trial over his head. He has been convicted to 2 years and 7 months of prison already, which already would ban him from running as a presidential candidate. If that judgment is confirmed, he appealed, and the appeal trial would have taken place now in April. And the day before his arrest, his university diploma was cancelled by Istanbul University, which also would ban him clearly from running as a presidential candidate, because a president in Turkey needs to have a university diploma. So why arrest him? This is really still something people don't understand, and I'm really curious to hear what our other experts here will say. He was charged for, he was then accused for corruption and for support of terrorism. The judge, though, only detained him for corruption charges, but the terrorism accusations still stand. My second point is now the protests. The protests, they are because of Imamoglu and CHP, so his party, but it is not about Imamoglu and the CHP, at least not only. CHP reacted first very cautiously. The president said, okay, the government probably knows what they are doing. Then there were huge protests from students mostly for that reaction. And then something surprising happened, at least surprising to me. There was a metamorphosis of a CHP president, Özgür Özal, who was just re-elected on an extraordinary party convention last Sunday. Yes, it's CHP members out there, but they are not the majority. The majority are young people, and we have basically 2 groups. We have the students, mostly leftist students, worried about their future, and we have right-wing nationalist youth, also very much worried about their future. We also have, of course, Kemalists, we have the middle classes, we have the pensionists that fear poverty. The difference to the Gezi protests in 2013 is we have, at least in terms of visibility, very few Kurds. The Kurds now have an own process ongoing with the government. We can talk about later, perhaps, a peace process. Also, very few Alawites, who were the most victimized group in the Gezi protests. Feminists are not visible, LGBTI are not visible. So it's not the Gezi folks, you can say. It's a very heterogeneous mass, but this is also dangerous and interesting, or dangerous for Erdogan, because they represent different sectors of society. So Erdogan cannot just easily say these are the usual people that oppose the government. He really has to take that serious. The protests grew rapidly every night for the first week, thousands, 10,000s, culminating in a huge demonstration on March 29th with what CHP said was over 2 million. Probably more realistic is to say 500, 600,000 people. Still probably the biggest demonstration in the last 20 years or so in Turkey. So the loss of their future perspective is the major motivation for most of the people who are out there on the street. And the Imamoglu arrest was like a valve for them to put this out, which was already inside them for a long time, and they didn't know how to express it in the repressive climate we have in Turkey for years now. And then the third question now would be, and the one thing I just want to mention, the CHP had some interesting ideas. So for instance, they made a vote for Erdogan, for Imamoglu, Ekrem İmamoğlu. So people voted, they put ballot boxes everywhere for the CHP members to vote for him as presidential candidate, which over 90% did. But then they also put ballot boxes symbolically for any other Turkish citizen that could also cast his or her vote for Imamoglu. And these two votes together summed up to something like 15 million, which is almost a fourth of the Turkish electorate, and which is more votes than CHP had in the last elections, where they beat the government party for the first time in the last 20 years. So that was an interesting thing. And now also we had a boycott going on 2nd of April and still going on. This is also symbolically interesting because it creates a big possibility for participation for a lot of people in Turkey. Okay, so my last point, what is next? What I hear from experts is that Imamoglu most probably will stay in prison, and that he is almost certainly banned from any possibility to be the next presidential candidate for CHP. So CHP needs a new candidate. And we can discuss that later. There are, of course, two figures. One is the Ankara mayor, Mansur Yavaş, but also the party president, Özgür Özel, has, as I said before, he had a surprising metamorphosis. He was a rather pale figure so far, but he has managed these protests quite well. And now he is also on the scene. The question now is, Erdogan sort of, many people think he underestimated the public reaction. I'm sure Burak and Meltem will have more to say about that. And so he put himself now in the need to decide he cannot step back. So he will have to continue and perhaps increase repression, because what is the important thing at stake now is that we are at a turning point for the future of the political system in Turkey. Political scientists like Professor Çopur call it, as I understand, Turkey as a competitive authoritarianism. So yes, an basically authoritarian system with a democratic facade, but with still rather free elections, which allow for a government to be turned down by an election. And exactly this element now Erdogan is eliminating. So it is a crucial point. And the question is, what is going to happen? Will he now go further, crack down on opposition in general, as he already is proving, or what is going to happen? And so far, the protests have been surprisingly peaceful, and we haven't had any very severe incident. But what will happen when the first dead body is lying in the street is a question we have to face. Also, the other big enemy is still, that is the enemy Erdogan cannot put in jail. That is the economic crisis. And that economic crisis is ongoing. With that move, you can say that Erdogan destroyed practically the work of Finance Minister Şimşek for the last 2 years, working so hard to attract foreign investment. With that move, it was mostly erased. So, and what my last remark on the movement and how it will continue. Of course, Erdogan can say, okay, elections are going to be held in 3 years. Even if he needs earlier election, they can be only 1 or 2 months earlier. So he has any time to sit out these protests. They don't have the potential to last for 2 or 3 years. They are unorganized, which is heterogeneous, which is an advantage, as I said earlier, but it's also a disadvantage when it comes to the longevity of these protests. So we will have to see. We have a next test. Erdogan prolonged Bayram, so the holidays after the end of Ramadan. So we haven't had protests now for like 10 days. We are going to see next Sunday in Samsun at the Black Sea, and another big demonstration is scheduled. We will see what what happens now. And my very last point now is just, as I said, a teaser for our discussion. What can we in Germany and in the EU do? I'll just say, though, we need a well thought, that means a strategic EU reaction, because we don't have a Turkey strategy in the EU. It has to be well thought, it has to be straightforward, and it has to be consequent. We as German Green Movement, we have been and will continue to support the idea of having a dialogue with Turkey, even under these circumstances, but the pressure has to be bigger, it has to be different, and it has to be more consequential. This is at least my personal opinion, and I'm very curious to hear what Deborah and the others will have to say on that. So thank you very much. I will return the word to Jan-Philipp.
Thank you, David. I mean, this has been a very in-depth picture already on how these protests have evolved, and the situation is like at the moment also in Istanbul and on the political scene in general. And you even also now address the international perspective, which we will certainly also have to discuss with the other speakers. I'd like to just nonetheless turn back to you for another question, because I mean, Heinrich-Böll Foundation, HBF, is in Istanbul since 30 years. We have a long-standing network of partners in civil society, and then also like with progressive political parties around. And the question comes up, like, how do you feel these partners look at the current situation? Do you have did you get certain feedback there? And maybe in particular also with regards to those partners in the southeast of Turkey, how do they see it? If you might just bring some ideas to us before we further go on.
Yes, thank you, Jan. Yes, I think the reaction of our partners has been first quite pessimistic, and then they turned in the sense that the protests grew and did not stop, but grew. It turned into a cautious optimism would perhaps already be too much, because many partners of us think that Erdogan, in the long run, that has been their experience for so many years now. In the end, Erdogan has always, he holds the stick in his hand, right? But the optimism derives from the fact, as I said earlier, that situation now is different. He really might have committed a mistake, and he is facing a movement that cannot be reduced to a certain sector or to just one political party or to that ominous civil society, but it's really a bigger movement that is clearly expressing a deep discontent with government policy and also with Erdogan himself, because nobody has any doubts that it is Erdogan, and this was not an autonomous decision of the judges. The judicial system in Turkey is not autonomous. Everybody knows there's Erdogan behind. So yes, it's also about him as a leading figure in Turkey. Our partners in the southeast, in the Kurdish-dominated region, they are very silent now for a very good reason, because there is another very interesting and important political process ongoing in Turkey, which now has been down on the priority list, and people are not talking about it so much anymore. But in the region, the people and media talk still a lot about it, which is the possibility of a peace process between PKK, the Kurdish movement, the Kurdish organization, and the Kurdish movement in general on the one side, and the Turkish government on the other side. You might know, but perhaps not everybody here from our listeners or viewers here, that the PKK organization, the imprisoned leader, he came out and came up with a statement calling for the disarmament of his own organization. This was what the government was asking for. That was in late February, if I remember correctly. Ever since, actually, there is nothing more happened, because the Kurds now say the ball is on the half of the government, and they now should react and do something in the sense of, giving some proof for more democratizing moves they are expecting from the government. And the government says, okay, well, but okay, you said you're going to lay down their arms, but we don't see it. So this is what we see on the surface. But we are sure, and we know there are a lot of talks ongoing behind the scenes. So we are waiting for the next public appearance in this process, but not to put into danger, because for the Kurdish movement, this is really a chance. They consider it a chance. So they are not very articulated in these protests right now, but they have condemned it. The party leaders, the co-presidents, they have clearly condemned it when they happened. But they are not as visible among the protests as they have been, for instance, during the Gezi protests.
Thank you very much, David. Very important other perspectives also, including from the Kurdish perspective, which is interesting with this overlap of these negotiations ongoing already before. So I'd like to go on with Meltem Aslan. She's a human rights defender and co-director of a human rights organization, which I named already, and you can pronounce far better than me, maybe. Being a human rights defender with decades of experience, how do you look at what is happening right now from also, in particular, the civil society perspective, which is very crucial right now? Meltem.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you for inviting me. David, also thank you for giving your perspective on what's happening on the ground, as I'm not in Turkey these days. So I, of course, hear from friends, colleagues, and read a lot, but it's great to hear from as many people as possible. So let me try to say a few things about the civil society perspective and also touch upon the Kurdish issue as David did and continue from there. And then maybe just a couple of things where I agree with David and where I disagree with several things he said. So I think it's important to go back about at least 10 years to what the civil society in Turkey has been going through. Just like the rest of the world, the whole concept of shrinking, closing civic space right after the Gezi and the breakdown of the 2013-15 peace process and then the 2016 coup attempt. So about 10 years, civil society has been under immense pressure in Turkey. It is about taking people and arresting them in custody and, all sorts of smearing campaigns. So what the civil society has been trying to do in Turkey for the past 10 years at least is trying to stay alive, not to be closed as organizations or not to be arrested by whatever you say as an individual. But not only that, so not just trying to survive, but also to thrive, really, by trying to be a massive, major force in everything that's going on. And that's very difficult because what happens is, of course, there is a lot of auto-censoring because you want to continue to work as a civil society organization, and everything you say can be and is used against you to shut down organizations as well as put people in jail. So there's this huge struggle and on the one hand, it's, I think, been very resilient, resisting, even if by keeping record, continuing to follow cases, even if there's no expectation from the legal system and the rule of law for any positive, in the sense of democracy and human rights, decision to come out, still continuing to pursue the cases, pursue the following of the government's actions. So I think it's still doing that despite all these very adverse circumstances. but also I think every time something like this happens, and it's happened so many times over the past 10 years, with the arrest of Osman Kavala and other colleagues who are still in jail now almost for 2.5 years, Gezi trials, Selahattin Demirtas being in jail, and every little or big intervention of the government. So what the civil society then also goes through, and I think also many people in the country, as David said, is, okay, is this it? Are we going into full authoritarianism? Or are we still in competitive authoritarianism or illiberalism? So I think, and a lot of people I've been reading and hearing in the last weeks saying that, okay, now Turkey is not even a competitive authoritarianism anymore. It is, or Erdogan is not going to have elections, so this is going to be a full authoritarian regime. But I actually don't think so, because I think this is how Erdogan rules, really, like many other competitive authoritarianism regimes around the world. So this is where I disagree with David slightly, that he did not expect such a reaction and he miscalculated. I don't think it's a miscalculation or not expecting such a reaction from the public. I think maybe he may have miscalculated that there wouldn't be such a, in a way, unified front as the opposition. But I think there's a method to this madness, both in Turkey and Erdogan and around the world. And I think they try to rule by keeping people sort of on the edge all the time. Like, are we going to have elections? Are we going to, you put your major competitive in prison. So who's going to be the candidate? So I think this is a way of ruling, in a way. And that's I think what is very dangerous, because what also happens is, and this is where I want to get into the Kurdish issue a bit, is that there's huge hypocrisy, in the sense that, and everybody knows this, that, he's putting Imamoglu in prison for corruption plus terrorism charges. And by the way, just a little parenthesis here, this is also a tactic. So like, they put people in prison with several possible charges, and then they kind of decide, seeing how it goes, which was the same with Osman Kavala and our other colleagues. And also that gives the government the chance to be able to charge them with the other one when the first one doesn't go so well. So this is also a tactic. But I think the hypocrisy is that he is charging Imamoglu for being or assisting terrorists, and then he's, on the other hand, on the side, trying to make a deal with the Kurdish people to have a peace process, right? So, but I think what's important is that this hypocrisy, I don't know if it's important, but I think what is different than Gezi and its aftermath is that I don't think many people buy it anymore. That's the thing. Like, I think after Gezi and after the coup attempt, after 2016, he was able to convince at least a majority of his supporters that this is a coup attempt against him and foreign forces. This is all a conspiracy theory. So he was able to convince the majority of his supporters. I have a feeling that I think he's going to have a difficult time convincing even his supporters right now, because I think everybody sees most of the hypocrisy and the lack of truth. Does it matter? I don't know, because unfortunately, hypocrisy seems to be a universal value these days. If any of you have watched Trump and Netanyahu last night, in quite horror, the way Netanyahu was talking about how they're freeing Palestine from terrorists and letting the Palestinians choose where they live is just so similar to the rhetoric we heard 10 years ago after 2015 from Davutoğlu when he was talking about Diyarbakir, that he was going to turn it into a beautiful paradise. And so, I mean, this kind of hypocrisy, I think, is very common, very universal. And unfortunately, maybe what has changed a bit in the last few years is that, like, I have to hesitate. I have to think about whether I can even say this in Germany these days, right? I think that's also part of the problem, that Europe and the West is not forced to get Turkey back into democracy and human rights because the issues of security, be it, the refugee crisis a few years ago, be it the Middle East and Syria issue now, or the NATO and Turkey's big army, always dominates over human rights and democracy. So I think this is increasingly becoming a huge problem as well. So I think if I should wrap up, maybe I'll just wrap up by saying that from a civil society perspective, I think still resilience and continuing to work on documenting what's going on, keeping record, and doing whatever can be done without putting the organization on or people in danger seems to be the only way to go forward. And being away these days and looking back at my colleagues working on the ground, I think it's an extremely challenging situation, but I think the civil society has really learned to keep that balance to some extent. And I think they will continue to do so.
Thank you very much, Meltem, also for the broader picture of in which situation we are with Erdogan's kind of autocratic power, which includes obviously to fuel those tensions and the struggle of civil society, and also of broadening the picture vis-a-vis the European actors and their role in this, which David already also highlighted. I'd like to ask you maybe 1-2 questions also on specific issues. All of this, this has been starting with the charges brought against Imamoglu. So the question comes up, of course, how credible, if at all, are these charges? Also for you as an organization with a lot of experience on judicial charges or procedures in this extent, is there any independence also in the judiciary remaining in Turkey regarding such a case, for example, or also in general, if you might comment?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, so but even if I were a lawyer, I probably wouldn't be able to comment so much on the merits of the case because there is none, and there's no information about what the evidence is, what he is being really charged with in terms of like the evidence, other than a couple of testimonies that are, of course, also not disclosed. So, but I'm not a lawyer, like I said, but my organization, Hafıza Merkezi, like you said, has been working on legal issues and the court cases of a very different nature for the past 10, 12 years, which is the state violence and the disappearances and extrajudicial killings, so grave human rights violations that occurred in the 90s, and then also after 2015, between 2000 and 2015, the children and people in the Kurdish regions that have been killed. So we follow the cases, and we've seen over and over that the judiciary makes decisions based on politics and based on power politics in these cases where there is glaring evidence for disappearance cases or other kinds of killings. The perpetrators will go free, they will be acquitted because that's what needs to be done from the state directives. So it's not surprising that a system which completely ignores evidence to charge perpetrators with crimes against humanity or grave human rights violations, for such a system to then produce evidence to put people who are completely innocent in jail. And of course, we all know that recently they don't even feel like they have to produce any kind of evidence. I mean, this is the level that we're at, that I think what we can say is that if you ask the Kurds, there's never been an independent judiciary in Turkey. So maybe it is now the rule rather than the exception overall. So currently, unfortunately, like I said, I cannot speak to the actual case of İmamoğlu and the corruption charges or anything else because I don't know the facts, but I can very definitely say that there is no reliable and independent judiciary, and there has really never been, but it's just kind of extended to many different areas, whereas it used to be with the state violence and the perpetrators of the grave human rights violations. Now it's extended to a much broader area.
Thank you very much for that insight also in the general situation, on the general situation of the judicial fairness, but also maybe if I may ask a little bit more general from what you hear also from your civil society actors regarding the driver for the protests, it becomes more and more obvious that a general sense of hopelessness and futurelessness, especially among young people, may also be a reason that there is such a momentum right now. Do you feel that too? And how do you hear that from the partners you're working with?
Yes. I mean, I think you're referring to more the young population, maybe, if I understand you correctly. And that is true. In fact, I have been reading some research and some surveys recently, and this is an interesting fact that got me by surprise too. I could guess that it would be very high, but I think the Gen Z, so Z, it makes up about 28% of the Turkish population, which is obviously a huge percentage and a huge number that will be voting for the first time whenever the next elections is. So that's one, I think, important number. And the other one is that there are 23-year-olds who have seen nothing but Erdoğan and the AKP government. So they're very angry, I think. They're very angry and feel like their future has been stolen. Unfortunately, a lot of young people leave the country, but still, Turkey is a country with population over 80 million, and that's about 25 million Gen Z, very young people, angry. And I believe young people at the end of the day will make a change if there's any possibility for change in this world and in Turkey. So I see that as an important force. Yes, I think the universities, you know, have been very active as a ground of resilience and demonstration and struggle, and that's important. I think the percentage of youth and the feeling of the youth is definitely a critical factor. Maybe that the only place that gives me hope, really, in this whole thing.
Thank you. Very important also to see where some hope could come from. And as you mentioned, university as rooms for activism, I'm continue maybe to also invite Burak Çopur to us, who is a professor at the International University in Essen. And Burak, I mean, it comes up the general question also to a political scientists somehow. How can we understand the nature of the AK party regime after the Imamoglu arrest, now seen from the perspective of this situation in which Erdogan leadership and also the country with these protests and this also social situation we just heard is right now?
Thanks, thanks, Jan, for inviting me, and thanks for the great overview, Meltem and David, to the events in Turkey. So, yeah, first of all, I'm not sure if nothing is new and if there is not a new quality in these events. Because the arrest of an elected mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, Istanbul is the largest city in Europe with 16 million inhabitants, breaks for me a taboo in Turkey, not only for me, but also I think for the protesters also. And although many elected Kurdish mayors have been removed in the last time and arrested, like the mayor of Diyarbakir, something new is happening here. And I think this is very historical that the mayor of Istanbul was now removed and arrested, and he is a member of Turkey's strongest opposition party, the Republican People's Party. So we should think about it. If everything is like before, and everything is similar in the system of Erdogan, or if there is something, if there is a new quality in these events. So first of all, in these discussions concerning the political system of Turkey, there is a lot of misunderstandings. First of all, Turkey was never a classical liberal democracy with check and balances and separation of powers like we know from Western European countries, not even before the AKP government. So before Erdogan came into power, the Kemalist military and the upper judiciary had the political power in Turkey, not the elected governments. We can see that in the military coups, the three military coups in 1916, 1971, or 1980. But although the Kemalist regime were not democratic, let's say, the Kurds will, I think, understand it mostly better than other groups in Turkey. The judiciary was more or less functioning, let's say that. And free elections were held in the 19th. That has long since changed under Erdogan. We can see we had elections like president elections in 2023 or local elections, but they were not really fair, only partially free, let's say that. And with the arrest of his strongest challenger, Ekrem İmamoğlu, David explained him very well, I think. Now Erdogan wants to bring a new quality in his system, I guess. So elections are no more so important for him. And I think he decided to abolish the partially free elections, let's say that, and possibly make himself president for the rest of his life by amending the constitution, maybe with the Kurds, we don't know. So this is a point we should discuss, the Kurds in this role. I think they are making a mistake and that's why I would disagree with David in this case, because it's a critical moment now, and the Kurds, there are a really strong opposition in Turkey, but now they are holding speech with talking with Erdogan and the AKP about the solution, a peace process, which I don't know what the peace process is. I'm reading everyday news about Turkey, but I don't understand this peace process and what is the target of this peace process. So we will see. So Erdogan, I think, is now trying to transform the regime into a new a new form of autocracy, and this is a scientific discussion if it's now a competitive autocracy or it's going to be a full-fledged dictatorship like the Russian model under Putin. But one thing is clear, the timing is perfect for Erdogan. The international situation seemed to be favorable for Erdogan. So the opposition leader Özgür Özel is now trying to call for early elections to put more pressure on Erdogan. But yes, I agree with Meltem Aslan that Erdogan is behaving like that, as we can see in the Turkish Supreme decision of the Turkish Supreme Election Council, who annulled Istanbul's May elections in 2019. So the question is, even if there are early elections in Turkey, Erdogan still can instrumentalize these state institutions to prevent political change. So the protests, the boycotts, I think they are successful because the Erdogan regime is in panic, really panic. So yesterday, all important ministers and the AKP leaders, they twittered against Özgür Özel. So the regime is in panic. That's for sure. But the international situation is more favorable for Erdogan. The EU appears to be reliant on Turkey. Turkey has the second strongest army in the NATO. So the EU needs Turkey for a post-war order in Ukraine and to build up a European security architecture. The USA under Trump wants to mediate between Israel and Turkey in Syria, as we saw yesterday in the press conference in the White House. Trump likes Erdogan, and Erdogan likes Trump. So two buddies who like each other, we heard yesterday from President Trump. So there is an international collaboration between the populists and autocrats of this world, from Trump, Le Pen, Orban to Erdogan. But there are also worldwide protests against them in the US, in 50 cities. That's very important for the civil society, I think, in Turkey and also in Israel against Netanyahu. And that makes hope. By the way, Pikachu, the symbol of the resistance in Turkey, was also seen in the protests in the USA and Israel. And that shows also that the solidarity of the protesters with Turkey is a good sign. So there's also not a solidarity between the autocrats, also a solidarity between the civil society and the protesters in the world, and that makes hope.
Thank you very much. Also on that note, to mention what are the points which makes still hope in this light, and also to highlight what actually is the change in the situation, and might be also different from the protests or moments we have seen before. Before coming to Debbie Düring, who just also appeared on screen as she enjoyed her well-deserved lunch also by listening to us still, I would like to ask you, Burak, another question also, because there is obviously also the international position of Turkey again and again coming up, and Meltem Aslan and also David Bartit were already referring to the question: how does the European Union, how do the European partners assess the situation? How do they react to it? And like how does it interact now with the Turkish government's international position also in the current context? We have geopolitical challenges. So how do you assess also the leverage which German or EU policymakers still have on this government? How do you answer to this big question coming up?
As a big fan of the European Union, I would say it's typical for the European Union how the European Union reacts and acts concerning Turkey. The EU is trying to bust his head in the sand and look the other way for as long as they can. We will see how it depends how the pressure is getting bigger and bigger from the civil society. And resistance is stirring in many European capitals. Mayor of European cities are protesting. Delegation from the Prime Minister of Greece, Papandreou, the SPD and Green parliamentary group are traveling to Turkey to express their solidarity with Ekrem İmamoğlu. And I don't expect much from the European Union. I think the more pressure comes from below, the more the ladies and gentlemen from Brussels will put their interest and realpolitik beside and have to react. And let's go back to 2017. It's for me a very interesting year in the Turkish-German relationships. Turkey has published a terror list with hundreds of German companies, including Daimler-Benz and BASF. As you can remember, this terror list of the German companies. And Germany under Mrs. Merkel then announced a change in Turkey's policy and threatened with sanctions and the distraction of the modernization of the custom union. So what was the sanctions? Namely the suspension of Hermes guarantees. For the audience, Hermes guarantees are export credit guarantees that protects German exporters and banks from non-payment by foreign customers. So it's a key instrument of German foreign trade policy. So, and under a few days later, this terror list was withdrawn by Turkey. They said, oh, sorry, it was a misunderstanding. Sorry for that. So what we can see that we have the opportunities in Germany and in Europe with our economic relations, strong economic relations with Turkey, such as the suspension of the Hermes guarantees or the distraction of the modernization of the EU-Turkey custom union or tightening travel restrictions. But apparently Germany doesn't want to upset Erdoğan. Not only this government, before also Angela Merkel and others, they doesn't want to upset Erdoğan for now. I didn't hear any statement of our new chancellor, of our next chancellor, Friedrich Merz, about the events in Turkey. So this is very sad for Europeans who believe in this great institution and with its values, which I'm teaching every day, and for my students, how important the European Union is. But Friedrich Merz, the next Chancellor of Germany, didn't say anything. I haven't said anything about the events. So, and that's very thoughtable and very thinkable that Germany as a leading country is silent till now.
Thank you, Burak.
Thanks.
Very important aspect and a very a bold point to be put towards our next speaker, Deborah Düring, who is member of the German Parliament for the German Greens, who've been, Debbie, in government until now and will not be part of this new government led by Friedrich Merz, which Burak was referring to now. Of course, that brings up the question how you looked back on the recent relationships between Germany, EU, and Turkey on the other side, and also on the question how has this or which perspective has this relationship now in light of these events in Turkey, with the extent Burak Çopur was just describing, and and what kind of green political perspective do we see also from the Greens in the German Bundestag regarding this now? Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation and the discussion. I would first start with the point that obvious Germany is currently in a political transition phase, which naturally also weakens the impact to the current German government as on an international level. And to be honest, I wish it would be different because I think clear language is urgently needed in this world, also regarding to what is happening in Turkey. And I also wanted to add that from a green side, I think in these days, not only Max looks as head of the parliamentarian group from the Greens, also Felix Banacek as the head of our Green Party in Germany, and Terry Reinke, head of the European Parliament Green Group, are together in Turkey to show their solidarity. So I think that's a really good signal of what is our position on this point. And I mean, the Greens stand for a value-based foreign policy. And I mean, that was also the basic for Annalena Baerbock in the last 3 years. And I mean, if we're looking on Turkey, I would say that is our general approach. We supported, for example, the Kurdish rights, the peaceful resolution of conflicts, all these issues. I think you know better than I do. And I also, on a political level, have to be clear that if we would live in a perfect world, we would only cooperate with countries which we will share the same values. But I mean, you know better than I do, we are not in this situation at the moment. So the question is, how do we act as politicians in this unperfect world, where we have, and I mean, the panelists pointed it out, where we have different interests on the table. So we are facing a profound change in the world order, as we knew it before, and the active undermining of multilateral organizations and the process by the US government under Donald Trump and its absolutely transactional policy present us as Europe as an enormous challenge, not at least only in the security policy, also in other policies. And I mean, we see also an authoritarian rule rising, disregard of democratic norms, and the rule of law around the world is also a little bit like erupting. And I mean, you talked about how it is in Turkey at the moment. And I mean, that's in all, I think Turkey is only one part of this whole new world order. So I would say still Turkey is a really important actor with Germany and Europe closely cooperates, especially in security policy, but also in economic policy. So there's a kind of dependence. And I mean, we also have a huge Turkish community in Germany. That's a totally different part. But I think there are a lot of relations between Germany and Turkey. But it's also really clear that we can't deal with the situation at the moment like simply business as usual after President Erdogan has or did this massive violation on the principle of the rule of law, all the repression on human rights activists we are seeing at the moment. So as far as it's clear, we can't do it on this level again. And I'm also totally at Burak Kapoor that the EU countries must act together, and only then it will measure on or have a really impact on Erdogan. So the question now is, how do we do it? Because Germany is in this transition row, France is wherever, and we are dependent, for example, on all this migration issues on Turkey. We are kind of dependent on all the security issues on Turkey. So I would say finding clear words on the one side, but also not acting on a level like pressure, acting on a level like opportunities. Like, what opportunities can we offer Turkey if they are changing their policies? I think maybe that would be another idea. I don't know, we can discuss it. It's a room for discussion. But I have the feeling that more repression on Erdogan won't change his policy. So I think maybe we have to change our mind and thinking about opportunities that we can offer if Erdogan will change his policies. So that are my 5 cents on the discussion.
Thank you very much, Debbie. I think that's very important to get an impression. What are the possibilities also in the context of the current situation in Germany, but also of the European Union, where also Burak was already lining out the problems also the European Union has at this stage to get to certain decisions. May I still nonetheless come back to one question to you, because I mean, this is of course also a situation in which we see a general trend to authorization, to a general backlash on democratic actors globally. So there is a sense of urgency to get together with partners in Europe, but also like with Canada, with Korea, different partners around, that the European Union needs partners in this struggle geopolitically, but also with regards to security, to international order. How do you assess this struggling situation with Turkey now in relation to this trend and tendency? Like, is it necessary to lower down the tone from the European side, not to lose the Turkish government as an actor on that scene, or would there be a way how to follow up this aim, either without Turkey or in reducing the role of Turkey in that new kind of architecture of geopolitics? I know it's a very difficult question and it will be a big elephant in the room, but I'd like to start with you getting into that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I would refer on the argument that was said before. It's the best moment for Erdogan to do that. Because there's a lot of dependency also from a European side. And yes, we are in a in a different world now. But I mean, it's not new that we are having partners on different levels, and that we are having partners where we maybe don't agree with the values, but we have to find a way to work together. And I mean, Turkey, you mentioned that it's like a change we saw in the past, and we now like it's kind of peak, but it's nothing really new. So I would suggest, let's find a way where we are really clear in the tone. We are really clear on pointing out what is going wrong. Really clear in solidarity with the civil society on the streets, with all the actors who are under pressure at the moment in Turkey, being really clear on that. And also being clear on the point that for some things or challenges that are in the room, we need partners. So I would say, and that's why I made the point, thinking about how, for example, we can play better with the role of the dependency of Turkey on the European market. I mean, there is a dependency where Turkey needs Europe or the European market, and how we can like there more work with the idea of offering something could maybe be a new playing field. I don't know if this is the solution, but that would be my suggestion. So being clear in what are our values, what are we like, what do we don't like in the policy in Turkey at the moment, being really solidarity with the actors who are like supporting democracy in Turkey, but also being realistic and finding ways how we can work together in some topics. And yeah, maybe that's the new world we are living in now. And we will have to face it with different partners, actually.
Right. I mean, currently there is a group of European Greens in Turkey, and just this morning in German radio, Terry Reinke, the co-president of the Greens in the European Parliament, was having some clear words on the EU not taking enough of this clear stance towards the events in Turkey, towards the support of civil society and protest. David, when you listen to this, taking that clear stance and naming the points, like what would you see necessary in substance on that side? What do you miss on that side right now from the Europeans? And also on the other side, I mean, there has been voices like Serap Güler, a CDU politician, who called for restraint and keeping the tone down, to not like risk the necessary cooperation, which Debbie just lined out, and to address those criticism behind closed doors, which obviously also is a possibility, as Burak Chopo was lining out. We have the tools also to start torturing a bit the Erdogan government. But how do you assess this balance, David? And what would you like to see, or what our partners also mentioned to you would like to see?
Yeah, thank you. Well, our partners, I mean, I get it. It's really difficult. But I also have to say, Debbie, what you just proposed is the reality for so many years, and it doesn't bother Erdogan at all. I mean, if you are outspoken, criticizing, this is fuel for him. This is motivating him to play the flute again of the end of the predominance of the West and the multipolar world, and Turkey is going to be a new middle power and is positioning itself between the big blocs, etc. And So that is not changing anything. This is rather motivation for him to continue. And as Burak and also Meltem mentioned already, the transactionalism is ongoing for many, many years. And our partners are very disappointed by that. They feel abandoned by the EU. This I can say very clearly, and they don't understand it. I mean, they understand it rationally because the EU needs Turkey in the last years, first and foremost, to hold migrants, to stop migrants from coming to Europe. But also, of course, there is this now this concern with the new security architecture, EU security architecture, and the important role the second biggest NATO army, and I mean, if the US leave, they would be even the biggest, has to play in that system. Even though they also know they cannot. I mean, if Erdogan can be trusted in anything, it is that he cannot be trusted at all. I mean, you cannot rely on what he says. This is ask Turkish civil society, ask our partners, as Meltem said. You can always go to prison for a tiny tweet you wrote 12 years ago. They can always put you in prison, and they do that. He doesn't. So, I mean, but I mean, let's say the vagueness, sorry, Debbie, you answered that question with, also expresses exactly the problem. I mean, I don't have the solution either. I would start by saying we should, what is lacking now is, or for some years ago, there is, or let's put it the other way around. In the EU, what I perceive is a certain Turkey fatigue. So people are tired. Because of all that, what I just mentioned, and understandably so, right? But given the importance, and Deborah Düring also pointed out to that importance of Turkey, and it's undeniable, we need a strategy. And the people I talk to, I mean, I'm mostly referring also to what people that really know the situation in Turkey and in Brussels, for that matter. And they coincide in saying we need a Turkey strategy. We don't have that. We need it, and that strategy has to find a way that is more effective than the transactionalism we have had. So I would say where perhaps I differ a little bit is I think the EU has been downplaying the potential it has on his side or her side, the EU. So they always say all the leverage is with Turkey. So they are so important for the European security. They are so important for holding off the migrants. They are important for mediating between Russia and the Ukraine, perhaps, and for controlling the access and non-access during the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus. Yes, true. But I mean, 50% of the EU of Turkish exports go into the EU. I have seen Finance Minister Şimşek literally on his knees begging for foreign direct investment from Germany in an event in Ankara, and he does so continuously. There is the customs union. This is really a big issue. Also, the migrants, yeah, and also the visa issue. I mean, we still have Turkey is really annoyed, and principally Turkish business is suffering with the restrictions on in the visa politics of the EU and Germany in particular towards Turkey. So, I mean, being realistic, and what would be, I mean, I would ask Deborah, what are the opportunities you would like to offer to Erdogan? But if you offer it, do you really think he would move? I mean, he would take it back. He would release İmamoğlu. I don't know. But as I say, you see me, myself, I also don't have the solution. Nobody has a solution, but we have to take this now as a clear signal that the policy or the non-policy we have been having and following towards Turkey in the last, let's say, 10 years cannot continue like that. And for that, we need a group of like-minded, determined people to sit down inside the EU and say, okay, now let's really think it through and let's develop a strategy.
David, thanks for those clear replies to Debbie. But before getting back to Debbie and also giving the opportunity to answer your question, I'd like to invite Meltem and Burak on one point you mentioned, David, that is obviously there is a strong field, or there is a field where a strong action by the European Union can help or could help, and that seems to be the economy. So we all see that the economy is an issue which in Turkey gets more and more problematic for Erdogan. I mean, already since quite a time, the economic data is not so good. And Meltem, you mentioned on my question that there is this young generation, huge young generation without real perspectives. They look after these economic figures, of course, also the chances. You even referred, David, to the visa question. People who might want to study abroad or try to develop their own lives. So there seems to be some leverage. But I'd like to put that to you, Meltem, and then also maybe Burak, that there comes the question of what would be an efficient strategy on that, or where do you think that this might really have an impact in the end inside Turkey? Because the situation has been dire already before, and people were not really able to change the premises of this government. So would we even have a chance to really have an impact on this internal political situation with these pressures?
Well, I hate to be the devil's advocate, but unfortunately, we are going into a new world order, and even with economy, sometimes there's a really interesting book by the Nobel laureate Daron Acemoğlu and his laureate co-laureate James Robinson, actually, and why nations fail, and he discusses how sometimes these kind of leaders will intentionally sacrifice economic growth for personal power and empowering a narrow elite. So I know that's very that's not from a hopeful perspective, but we have examples of it, like Zimbabwe and Mugabe and many different other examples where even economy and economic situation doesn't really, I mean, deter these actions. So that's I don't want to leave it at that, because that's a very pessimistic perspective. But what I was thinking as Deborah was speaking and also David was that you know, I've been attending meetings by European Partners Union, various different institutions for many years now, and it's always the question at the end is always, you know, what can Europe do for Turkey? And it gets to be a bit of an annoying question at some point for civil society professionals, because we keep saying the same things and then nothing happens, and you know, the European court judgments don't get implemented, so forth. But I think we are at a different point in the sense that the question is not so much what can Europe and EU do for Turkey anymore, because we, like I said, and many of the speakers also mentioned it, that in the US with the Trump administration, plus European countries, Germany, France, elsewhere, we are actually starting to see similar violations of rights and democracy little by little. So maybe the question needs to be different. So maybe the question is, how can actually the forces against these anti-democratic I mean, obviously, I'm not saying it's at the same level, but you know, currently, correct me if I'm wrong, David, but what I read and hear is that there's a lot of police violence on the street. So, like, I think David mentioned something really important. What happens when we have the first, you know, atrocity, the killing of a person? That's going to be, hopefully we don't have it, and hopefully we can avoid it, but maybe it will be. But without that, like, there's a lot of violence on the street. There's torture and ill treatment and strip searches when people are taken under custody. So I'm not comparing the level necessary. So that's really awful in Turkey. But then we also see that there is police violence here in Europe and in the US, and people being treated very badly and ill treatment when they're taken under custody here or in the US. So maybe the question is, how do the forces against these get together? So like, how does civil society of different countries get together to really work together, collaborate? Because we know that the autocratic strategies, they are very similar. It's like from a playbook. So I think in the civil society, for at least the last 10 years of the shrinking and closing civic space, civil society has been trying to find a way to have our own playbook against these regimes, against these moves. But I don't think we've succeeded in doing that. And I don't think it's Turkey or places like Turkey anymore that will need it. It's everywhere. So there is need for a much broader transnational cooperative, collaborative effort from the civil society part. So again, I also don't know the answer how, but I am not sure if it's by, you know, either giving sticks or carrots to Erdogan, really, because it's more about the people and what they can do and what they can be empowered to do.
Yeah, that's important to get that and to see which possibilities and opportunities are there also. Burak, I'd like to also invite you on that. I just see that there's a lot of questions coming in which we won't be able to answer in full
Can
extent.
I pick one?
For example, you may just also look into it. Yeah.
Super. So thank you, Jan. I think the statements of worrying or concerning about the situations in Turkey means nothing for autocrats. So could all the worrying and concerning statements prevent Putin by attacking Ukraine? Of course not. So for Erdogan, that means nothing, just to be worried and to be concerning about the events. So autocrats, they understand about clear and hard consequences. So one consequences could be an infringement procedure of the Council of Europe to exclude the Turkey if it's going to arrest Imamoglu for a long time, to exclude Turkey from the Council of Europe. So we should think about this consequences which the European Council can use. But the first time I want to say one thing new and pick up a question of my colleague Sinem Adar. The first time in history, Erdogan is running away from the ballot boxes. So this is very important. The AKP and MHP regime doesn't want elections. So even President Erdogan is a really great election campaigner. So he won all the elections except 2015 and the local elections in Istanbul, but the other parliamentary and presidential election he won. So he's a great campaigner and he's in panic and he doesn't want any early elections. So what we can do is, and the opposition is doing that very well, I guess, to delegitimize the Erdogan regime. So Özgür Özal called the regime, the arrest of İmamoğlu a coup d'état, and they are not really accepting with these statements the legitimate system of Erdogan, and that made them crazy. So in polls, the opposition is winning all the polls. 63.5% of Turkish citizens support early general elections, and 75% are against İmamoğlu's arrestment. So the people and the opposition, they have now a good chance to win this political struggle when they get support. I mean, the political change will not come from Europe. It will come from the opposition and the protesters and the people and the civil society. So that would be wrong that we can change from Europe political. So I wouldn't support that, but we should support the civil society, like we have the Böll Foundations and others. We should support the opposition leaders with traveling to Turkey, and the chances of the opposition succeeding are, for me, 50-50 now. So it's a big historical chance, also for Europe, because I mean we have one full-fledged dictatorship near Europe, and it's attacking Ukraine, and we should think about it if we want a second full-fledged dictatorship in front of Europe. And this is also a security threat for Europe. And so Erdogan is not an integrator. He is he is a splitter. He will split the society more and more. That's my answer for Sinem Adler. So I think he will put more pressure, more suppression, more repression on the protesters and on the opposition, and to win this power struggle. And that's also very dangerous now for Turkey, because we don't know if it's getting violent, what's going to happen next. But Turkey has now a chance to change the political system and to get back to a parliamentary system and to a more or less independent judiciary. So that's how I think about the future of the events. The opposition has a big chance, but it needs also strong voices and also consequences from the European Union. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think like this seems to be the question which we have to follow up. Finally, Debbie, with you also again, like which role also can we and also Germany and the European Union play in strengthening the like the powers from inside, democratic powers also in Turkey. As we just heard also, of course, that pressure coming on the way directly vis-a-vis the government seems to sometimes also not be like sufficient or even don't really have an effect on the political decisions of Erdogan. I'd like to just highlight, David, that the question still in the air on the negotiations with the Kurdish minority and with the whole question, how does this change now in light of this situation, seems to be worth another round, which we do to a later occasion when we know a bit more about that. So I'd like to maybe keep those questions open on this moment, but we should take them with us and answer them on a later stage. But Debbie, I'd like to invite you also to come back to the question: how do we, or how do German and European politics can have an effect on the inner Turkish democratic situation and the power play coming up now between the opposition and the government?
Well, I would say I can totally agree on the question of thinking about what influence we can have on the Council of Europe and how we can there deal with Turkey. I think Max Lux also pointed out a few times in the public. So I totally agree on this. I also totally agree on the question of supporting civil society and supporting civil society on a transnational level. I mean, it's a huge thing. We have to do it. Also supporting progressive structures worldwide. Also another panel, I think. But my point was, and that, I mean, we can talk about, well, that was what happened in the past, but actually I didn't hear something really new now in this room. So I would say, for example, if we are talking about the European Turkey Custom Union, yeah, I mean, there's a dependency. I don't know, like Ms. Aslan said, if it will work out, but why we don't should link this negotiation, for example, to a return on the rule of law. Or why shouldn't we link, like, for example, also new export guarantee, like the Hermes thing Ms. Cooper said, to the conditions that Turkey returns to the rule of law. We can do the same, for example, with arms exports. But on all these issues, we also have to think about where Turkey at the moment on a security level is an important actor for us. And I think if we are talking about solutions and about how we can put pressure on Erdogan and finding solutions, we have to think about the situations in Syria, the aggression of Russia. I only wanted to mention it, and I don't think, I mean, on all this migration thing, I'm really clear on it. We shouldn't do a deal, and it's not a problem for Europe, but it's another debate. But on the security issues, I think we really have to think about how we can, like, that there will be a consequence and how we can deal with these consequences. And at the end, I hope, I mean, the visits of members of parliament, for example, is one important sign from our side on, like, supporting the opposition. I, for example, spoke on a demonstration in Frankfurt for supporting, like, Turkey coming back to the rule of law, for all these issues. So there is a movement also at the moment in Germany. We as members of parliament having a responsibility on supporting these movements, on standing in solidarity. And I hope that we will have in a few weeks a parliament that is really active on all these points. And yeah, the new coalition have to find a way how to deal with it. But, and that's the last point, I think what we are seeing in Turkey now is just one little piece of our new world order. And we are having to find solutions or ways to deal with this new world order. And it will be a process. And I hope that in Turkey, democracy will win. And we standing in solidarity with all these people on the street at the moment who are fighting for democracy. So let's see what will happen in the next few days.
Thank you very much, Debbie. On this note, this has been 90 minutes, but that's obviously not enough to follow up to such events which we are talking here. So there will be certainly more need for exchange, but thank you very much for this moment and this very insightful exchange. To Meltem Aslan, Human Rights Organization Director, Burak Korpur, Professor at University of Essen, Deborah Düring, member of the German Parliament for the Green there, and David Bartel, the director of our Istanbul office. Thank you very much for being with us, and we'll certainly see each other very soon talking further on this. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.